comes out with an ad that I'm in favor of Obamacare. Can you believe this? Just like he did with Carson, where Carson, he said, left Iowa. He's out of the race. Vote for him. Did you hear about this one? What kind of people are we dealing with these politicians? And made up liar, honestly, and made up stories.
That was Donald Trump at a rally in New Hampshire referencing our next guest. Welcome back to The World Over. Joining us from New Hampshire, Hooksett is the winner of the Iowa Caucuses, on the ground seeking to continue his momentum in the Granite State. Senator Ted Cruz, thank you for being here.
Raymond, it's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Now, you heard Donald Trump. He says you engaged in some kind of voter fraud by disseminating the idea that Ben Carson was leaving the race. Folks in Iowa say people representing your campaign at caucuses said Carson was out and they should shift their support to you. Should a new election take place? Should your results be nullified, as Donald Trump suggests?
Oh, look, Raymond, this is silliness. And you know, you understand Donald is rattled. He had announced to the whole world he was going to win Iowa, and then he didn't. And he's very upset, and he keeps making more and more outlandish attacks and insults. That's fine. He's entitled to do that. But I'm not going to respond in kind. I'm not going to engage in a battle of insults with Donald or anybody else. His underlying charge is ridiculous. What happened was there was a public news reporting that Ben Carson, after Iowa, was not going on to New Hampshire, was not going on to South Carolina. Instead, he was headed home to Florida. And so our political team sent that out to our supporters. It was a public news report, and it was true. It was true and accurate. He, in fact, got on a plane and headed to Florida. So what Donald is doing here is he's trying to distract from the undeniable fact that when Iowans looked at his record, they realized that his record wasn't conservative. And, you know, it's interesting, the clip you played there. What he is taking issue with is his own position on Obamacare. What Donald has advocated for decades is European-style socialized medicine, essentially expanding Obamacare to put government in charge of your and my health care so that the federal government is in charge of the relationship between your doctor and you. I think that's fundamentally wrong, and there's a real difference on policy between Donald and me on this. If Donald is elected, he will expand Obamacare to put the government in charge of our doctors. If I'm elected, we will repeal every word of Obamacare, and that includes dismissing the case against the Little Sisters of the Poor, who right now are being persecuted under Obamacare because the federal government is trying to force the sisters to pay for abortion-inducing drugs. That's wrong, and that will end if I'm elected president.
Senator Cruz, Ben Carson is saying evangelicals should consider this whole fracas that Trump is raising about there might have been some voter fraud here in suggesting that he was leaving the race. He said today in D.C. this.
It's clear that there were people who tried to take advantage of a situation, who tried to distort information. There's no question about that. Senator Cruz told me that he was not aware of that when I talked to him, and that he did not agree with that kind of thing. And we'll wait and see what he does to demonstrate that.
So what are you going to do, Senator? Are you taking any action in your campaign just to put this thing to rest?
Oh, look, this is all silliness. Ben Carson is a good man. He's a decent and principled man. This is a bunch of political noise over sending a press report that was true and accurate. And I would note, Marco Rubio's campaign sent the very same press report. His supporters were doing the same thing. But there's a reason why Donald Trump and others are attacking me and not attacking Marco Rubio for doing the exact same thing. It's because we won. And the reason we won in Iowa is we saw that old Reagan coalition coming together. We saw conservatives and evangelicals and libertarians and Reagan Democrats, the working class, blue-collar Catholics across Iowa and across the country, and we're seeing that coalition come together. And the nature of politics, Raymond, you know well, that when you're winning, everyone else shoots at you, and what they try to do is they try to lob nasty and personal attacks. Well, listen, I'm not going to attack Donald Trump. I'm not going to attack Ben Carson or anybody else. I'm going to stay focused on substance and issues. And you know, the question that I would say Catholic voters should ask in this race is who has a proven record of standing up and defending life? Who has a proven record of standing up and defending marriage? And who has a proven record of standing up and defending religious liberty? I have spent literally my entire adult life fighting to defend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, fighting to defend religious liberty. And that's the reason so many people of faith are supporting our campaign, because they're tired of candidates that talk a good game on the trail and don't do what they say. I'll tell you, Raymond, if I'm elected president on the first day in office, I will direct the U.S. Department of Justice to open an investigation into Planned Parenthood and to prosecute any and all criminal violations. And I will direct every agency in the federal government that the persecution of religious liberty ends today. And that's a big part of the reason why people of faith and conservatives are uniting behind our campaign.
I want to ask you about, you mentioned religious freedom, religious liberty. The president visited a Baltimore mosque yesterday, a mosque that has previous ties to some terror suspects. He said there that an attack on one religion is an attack on all religions. And he went on to characterize Republicans, and I imagine he would include you in that number, as somehow being bystanders to bigotry. Your reaction to that visit and those comments?
Well, listen, unfortunately, President Obama is so out of touch right now with the challenges facing this country, and sadly, so is Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. All three of them refuse even to say the words radical Islamic terrorism. The most important determination any voter is making in this election is who's best prepared to be commander-in-chief, who has the experience, who has the judgment, who has the clarity of vision and the strength of resolve to keep this country safe. We are facing a war against radical Islamic terrorism. It is Islamism, is a perversion of Islam. It is a theocratic and political philosophy that mandates of its adherents that they wage jihad and that they either murder or forcibly convert infidels, by which they mean all of us. And we need a president who confronts it, who is willing to acknowledge it exists, and in particular has the clarity of vision and strength to defeat it. If I'm elected president, we will defeat radical Islamic terrorism. We will utterly and completely destroy ISIS. Sadly, the president, rather than being a firm commander-in-chief, rather than keeping this country safe, instead, over and over again, he acts as an apologist for radical Islamic terrorism. You know, I'm reminded of the prayer breakfast a year ago where President Obama spoke, and it was right after, you'll recall, a Jordanian pilot had been lit on fire by ISIS. And in fact, the King of Jordan was scheduled to be at the National Prayer Breakfast, but he had to fly back because of the pilot. President Obama got up and spoke, and he gave a speech and said, well, yes, ISIS is doing bad things like crucifying Christians and beheading children and lighting people on fire. But he said, you know what, Christians and Jews have done bad things too, and he invoked the Inquisition and the Crusades. Now, the last I checked, the Crusades were over centuries ago. And I don't think it is asking too much for the President of the United States to stay within the current millennium. And the reason I use the word apologist is a strong word, but it has a very precise meaning. It means someone that gives an explanation, a rationalization, a justification for the actions. And I would note the radical Islamic terrorists, that's what they invoke, is the Crusades and the Inquisition. All of us, if Christians were murdering others because of their faith, we would speak out against it. If Jews were murdering others because of their faith, we would speak out against it. And it is profoundly harmful when the President of the United States refuses to acknowledge the evil of radical Islamic terrorism and instead stands up and makes excuses and justifications for it. It makes this country a lot less safe.
Senator Cruz, I have to play something for you. A lot of our viewers sent me emails about this comment. This is you, I guess it's about 2 months ago, at a rally. Here's what you said.
I have never met anybody, any conservative who wants to ban contraceptives. As I noted, Heidi and I, we have 2 little girls. I'm very glad we don't have 17. Last I checked, we don't have a rubber shortage in America.
Now, some larger families took offense at that statement. They say it's less than pro-life. Your reaction?
Well, listen, I come from a family where my grandmother, my mother's mother, was the second youngest of 17 kids. And so the point that I was making there, and that's a little snippet that's taken out of context, is in the last elections, the Democratic Party raised this specter of the war on women, and it was a political attack that was deliberately deceptive. And what they suggested to people is that there were politicians trying to take away your birth control. Now, I would note, and this is something that should be encouraging to all of us who are pro-life, the Democrats didn't wage that fight on the issue of life. On the issue of life, we are winning. This country is becoming more and more pro-life. People's hearts and minds are being changed. I am unequivocally pro-life. I think every life is a precious gift from God that needs to be protected from the moment of conception until the moment of natural death. But the Democrats didn't wage that battle on the issue of life. Instead, they did it on contraceptives, and it was deliberately deceptive. They were trying to scare young women into thinking some politician is going to come take their birth control away from them. And a point I was making through humor, and humor is often a very effective way to communicate, is that nobody was talking about banning birth control for anyone. Now, listen, I recognize that many people, many faithful Catholics, for religious reasons, don't use birth control. That is obviously their right to follow the teachings of their faith. I'm a Southern Baptist. That is not the teaching of my faith, but I respect those observant Catholics who follow that teaching. But nobody is suggesting banning birth control. And indeed, the point that I made going on is what this issue was about was the Little Sisters of the Poor. And this is, I talk about the Little Sisters all over the country. I talk every day because, as you know, the Little Sisters of the Poor are a Catholic charity. They devote their lives to caring for the poor and the elderly.
Yeah.
And right now today, the Obama administration is litigating against the Little Sisters of the Poor, trying to impose millions of dollars of fines on the sisters under Obamacare in order to force the sisters to pay for abortion-inducing drugs and others. Now, that is wrong. That will end if I'm elected president, and that's what the whole issue is. And so that illustration I was using was showing that the Democrats were deliberately distorting the issue to confuse people and mislead them, and we need to speak the truth and do it with a smile.
Senator, before I let you go, because I know you have got a ton of events today and I don't want to slow you up, what is the strategy in New Hampshire? We saw polls don't always come out as they're projected, as you demonstrated in Iowa. Now, in New Hampshire currently, Trump is in one poll at 38%, in another at 36%. You were between 13 and 14%. How do you close the gap, and what do you have to do here to be a success in your mind?
Well, listen, the strategy is to continue to reassemble the old Reagan coalition, to bring together conservatives and evangelicals and libertarians and Reagan Democrats. And I think the central issue in this election, people are tired of getting burned. We keep winning elections. And the people we elect, they go to Washington and they don't do what they said. And that's happened over and over and over again. And I think the stakes facing this country, they've never been higher. And so how do we differentiate? How do we avoid getting burned again? And, you know, the scriptural test is you shall know them by their fruits. What I would suggest to everyone is that you don't listen to what any of the candidates say. You don't listen to our campaign promises, because we've seen too many campaign conservatives that suddenly claim to be a conservative when they're on the campaign trail, but when they get to Washington, they don't honor their commitments. Instead, we need to look to our walk. You know, if a candidate says they support the right to life, every Republican claims that, we should ask, show me where you stood up and fought to defend the right to life. I have a record for 2 decades fighting to defend the right to life. As Solicitor General of Texas, I led a coalition of states in front of the U.S. Supreme Court defending the federal ban on partial birth abortion. And we won 5-4. I led a different coalition of states in front of the U.S. Supreme Court defending New Hampshire's law mandating parental notification. We won unanimously. And when the Texas legislature passed legislation banning taxpayer funding for Planned Parenthood, a federal district court struck that down. I personally argued the case in the Court of Appeals. We won unanimously, reinstating that law and defunding Planned Parenthood. So if you want someone who will stand for life, don't listen to campaign promises, but instead ask who has walked the walk and defended life. The same is true for marriage. The same is true for religious liberty. The same is true for defending the Constitution, for defending our values, for standing up against Obamacare. And what we're seeing in New Hampshire and nationwide is that conservatives and constitutionalists are uniting behind our campaign, because I have spent decades fighting to defend the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and the stakes are too high for us to get it wrong.
Do you need to win New Hampshire?
Of course not. We've said from the beginning we have not viewed any of the early states as must win. There are a number of candidates who bet their entire campaign on either winning Iowa or winning New Hampshire. From day one, we said, listen, we've got a great team on the ground in each of the first 4 states, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada. We hope to do well in each of the first 4 states. We're going to work hard to earn as many votes as we can. But that's going to be up to the voters. And 10 days after South Carolina is Super Tuesday. It's the so-called SEC primary. It's Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas. We've got an amazing team across Super Tuesday. So I hope and believe we'll do well in New Hampshire. I hope and believe we'll do well in South Carolina and Nevada. And then I very much believe we will do exceptionally well on Super Tuesday. But our strategy is based on the grassroots. We've got over 200,000 volunteers nationwide. You know, all the pundits said we would not win Iowa.
That's true.
The day before the Iowa caucuses, I watched the news. Everyone said Trump, 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 Trump was going to win. And what happened was the voters had something different to say about it. It was a grassroots army. And we're coming out of Iowa with more money in the bank than any candidate in the race because we've received over 800,000 contributions. It's got Washington terrified because the strength of this campaign is the grassroots, and I'm working to earn the votes of men and women all across New Hampshire right now.
Senator Ted Cruz, thanks for being with us. We will be watching you out on the trail and looking for another surprise there. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah. Thank you. God bless.